A few weeks ago, I was trying to pull some games off the shelf, and I thought, I need to play some of these Steffenfeld City collection games from Queen. I already like Bruges, so I'll start with Hamburg. That'll be an easy jumping in point. I already know Bruges, I like the cards, I like the powers that they all have in there. There's tons of interesting card effects and stuff, so I was excited to play that one. As I pulled Hamburg off the shelf, a new working redevelopment of it, I was really disappointed when I saw that all of the cards feature language-independent iconography, symbols on the bottom instead of text. Knowing how many different and unique card powers there are in Bruges, I said, I don't want to play this. I immediately packed it up and put it back where it belongs. So today I'm going to be talking about why publishers still continue to use language-independent iconography, symbology, or icons, however you want to call it. So let's go ahead and take a look at that. First reason, board game publishers are notoriously cheap penny pinchers who are trying to scam every dollar out of your wallet that they possibly can while maximizing. The real first reason is actually cost. It is cheaper to manufacture games when fewer parts of your game need to be translated. I'm going to be talking about this in a few different regards, but one concept I want to address first is the business concept of variable versus fixed costs. Variable costs are things that increase as you produce more of your output. So if you're producing board games, things like dice, those are going to be a variable cost. The more board games you produce, the more your dice costs go up. Manufacturing, shipping, warehousing, freight, logistics costs, that's all variable. It increases based on how many units you're pushing out. Fixed costs, on the other hand, don't behave that way. Think of that as more like salary for your employees. That's not going to change if they make more or fewer games. You're still paying them the same, or your lease or your rent for your office space, like those types of things. Now, that's not to say that you can't increase your fixed cost by, say, hiring more employees or getting a nicer or larger office space. And translation services fits in that fixed cost category. If you have more parts of your game that need to be translated into different languages, that's going to increase those fixed costs. Yes, you might be translating it into 20 languages as is, but if all they're doing is changing the rule book and, say, the box cover, then those fixed costs are going to be in totality smaller than also having to translate decks of cards, player aids, the board itself, or any other components that you need. It's also cheaper to print in bulk if you are going to produce 5,000 units of your game, and you can just say print 5,000 boards, 5,000 cards, 5,000 player aids, and you don't need to go through and say 800 Czech edition, 1,000 English edition, 1,000 German edition. Then you're just making more savings by printing in bulk. It's like buying in a bulk store. It's just you get that runoff, you get those economies of scale by printing more. Plus, you also get to save on the idea of you don't have to have as much overstock because of language-specific requirements. You're able to then sell a multi-language or multinational edition of your game in different markets. Second reason, iconography fits places better. It's not a shocker to say that companies are happier when they can have a card that doesn't have to worry about the text box running over. Languages are written and printed at different lengths. English is considered to be approximately a third shorter than most of the Romance languages, French, Spanish, Portuguese, and it's also considered shorter in general print than German. Being able to translate a phrase or a common concept from one language to another sometimes takes more words, especially when some of those phrases are from one language originally. The printable space that you have on a card might be very, very important to stay within the borders of, based on the art and the graphic design and the theme that you want to come through that. And so having language on that card can make it a nightmare for the translators and then also for the graphic designers as they're trying to update it across multiple language editions. Having an appendix in the rule book or as a separate booklet is much easier to fit and to maneuver the spacing of, so that's another consideration. Third point, board games can come to different markets quicker as multi-language editions are more standardized. Now, the previous 2 points have explicitly been beneficial to board game publishers. This is one that's beneficial to publishers, but as well as you and I as users of the product, gamers, players. If you want to have a game that is originates from a different country or from a different language, you're more likely to be able to see it sooner come to market when it is more language independent. In fact, if you can't wait, like some of the people at the Dice Tower staff, Mike Delicio, you can just order a French edition copy of a game and have it shipped in from a distributor or from an online retailer, and have your game fully playable and functional. All you have to do is get a translation of the rulebook, and you're set and you're ready to go. This is so much nicer than the stories of folks who were getting into gaming or in gaming just a few years before I was, about trying to paste up all the cards in Agricola. Agricola was the #1 rated game on Board Game Geek for a while before it even had an official English translation. Those instances are far and fewer these days because of this push more towards iconography, despite the downsides that it brings. Fourth and last point I'm going to bring up, they can honestly be more pretty. They can be more beautiful. This is something I had asked a few different people in the industry, their thoughts on the matter, because obviously there's some strong feelings, and there's also a lot of good experience and wisdom I wanted to pull from. And this is one in particular that I didn't think of. That iconography can be thematic, it can be beautifully done. It can work in a way that doesn't distract you. I'm trying to imagine the last time that I've seen a board that was just covered in text in one direction across the table, upside down, facing away from me on the other side. That's harder to read. Iconography is actually more beneficial to me as the user. When I see it all splayed out on the table, it's easier to see from a distance when it's tilted or at an angle or however it may be. It serves as a good reminder for different positions on the board or for the different phases of a game that otherwise, as written text, would not look good. I'm trying to imagine a game like Smartphone Inc. with text all over it, or the recent game Barcelona, where the board has icons for all of the actions and it looks gorgeous because the graphic design touches were so intentional and well made that the icons aren't an interference, they're part of the features of the game. And that for me is another positive. I think that it can be very well done and actually elevate and strengthen the game itself. And on that uplifting note, I'm still frustrated about Hamburg. There are multiple points I would like to bring up now as to why there are negative and bad experiences that people have with this language-independent iconography in games when it's executed in a poor or just blundering fashion. The first of which is just how much iconography is there. There are 280 cards listed in the game of Hamburg. That's far too many symbols to just keep track of. There's one appendix in the game that you're going to be passing around constantly. That just doesn't do for me because that's interfering with the game. Instead of having a nice aid and assistant, as I talked about previously, to remembering different aspects of the game, you've created a stumbling block. People refer to these as hieroglyphics that you have to learn. And while, yes, it's true, learning the icons of a game, that's easier than, say, learning German to just play a German edition of a game. It's still an interference with the user interface. At some point, an overload of symbols is a hindrance to the game. Now, you might have designed a very complex game, and therefore that's going to just be part of the territory. Whether it was icons or whether it was text out there, it's going to be difficult. Not every game that has text on it instead of icons is necessarily easy to learn, but there are times and places to use iconography better. There are some games that I think do a really great job by mixing symbols with text, and that, as I mentioned, is still going to increase your translation efforts, but there's times where it's probably going to be worth it. Another consideration is how much of that iconography is secret and is therefore going to interfere with the flow and the experience of gamers trying to play your game. If I have a handful of 7 cards full of different symbols, and I have to say, hey, does anybody know what the red circle with a glow behind it, an arrow down with a meeple laying down on it means? Not giving away my strategy at all by any chance. Or hey, hand me the one appendix again because there's not enough player aids to actually help me decipher what my cards do. Hey, can I ask this question without spoiling what I'm trying to pull off here with my secret information in my hand? There are some games like Race for the Galaxy. This has been a long time critique of that game, that the iconography is bad. And I would argue it's less that iconography is bad, it's that there's so much of it and it's so secret because you are trying to keep your plans from other players necessarily. You want to piggyback off of them choosing certain phases, so you don't want to have to ask, hey, what does this planet do if I build this planet this turn? because that could affect other players' play and is going to slow down your experience of what is a fast-paced and quick-moving game. I only bring up Race for the Galaxy because it's a salient example, and once again, I'm not even criticizing it. I'm not saying it's bad. It just is the experience that people are going to walk away from. So if you have secret information and a lot of icons, people will have those complaints. How many of your icons are unique, or are they repeated and iterated upon? If you have an icon in your game that shows up one time, think to yourself, do I really need that to be a symbol? Or can I have a shorthand text version of it? Or can I change it in a way that it leans off of something else that the player has already been asked to learn? Because that's going to make the experience better for them. It's going to be less of a hurdle. Consider if your icons are consistent within the game itself and are kind of fitting into the norms that you see in the industry. One of the problems that people had with Great Western Trail is that, yes, there's a lot going on. However, the use of symbols for plus and minus coin cost value was not consistent, it was not intuitive, because negative costs were actually worse for you, but plus costs were actually good. But it doesn't make sense because that's not how other games tend to represent those concepts. And there were times even within the game itself where positive and negatives kind of meant the opposite of where you saw them in other places. So try to make things consistent if possible. Learn from what other games are doing. Garfield Games is one of those companies I always say has incredible graphic design, good use of symbology and icons that are just easy to interpret from one game to the next. And I almost feel bad using them as one little negative example, but they're the most recent one I can think of. I played Circadian's Chaos Order, and one of the resources in the game is a lightning bolt representing energy, and they had to create a new icon for when you play a card and it has an instant effect. It's a finger pushing a button that means instant effect, whereas in so many games out there, usually a lightning bolt means one-time instant effect. And because they use that as a resource in the game, they couldn't use that as their instant effect icon. And I found that to be a little bit clunky. It was just weird to learn that first time and see what's going on with this icon here. As I said, normally they're a shining example of companies that has an identity and uses symbols in a way that I can follow them consistently from one game to the next. And so try to do those things and be aware of what else is the standard in your industry. So is the point of this whole video basically saying I don't want to play Hamburg? Absolutely is. Bruges exists. I'm very fortunate that it's in the Dice Tower library, and that's the copy of the game that I'm going to play. And that's a huge problem. I don't want others to have that experience. A recent reprint, Archaeos Society, a slight redevelopment from Ethnos, one of my favorite games of all time, also kind of rubbed me just a little bit raw that they had switched from a game that had text written out on all of the cards to a game that had iconography, and in my opinion, not the strongest either, and not the most visible from across the table. All these benefits that I talked about, it wasn't quite there. But there's 12 different effects in the entire game. That's not too hard to learn. That's not 280. And that to me is just one of those instances where you crosses the line, and it just makes it too hard for me to actually want to play the game. So I made this video to discuss and hopefully give you some more context of when I criticize games for their for their use of symbols and everything, what I mean by that, and at what point do I kind of forgive when a company is doing this, and I think with good intention and in a well-done way, versus when I don't think that they do. There are some graphic designers that I look at and I say, hey, these guys are just doing it absolutely right. These folks over here are making things in a way that I can follow and understand, despite the fact that it is just pictures, little icons that mean so much, but they can mean so much and be so intuitive, or they can mean so much and be so clunky. So there you go. That's just a little discussion there. I hope that you maybe have some other insights and additional points that you'd like to bring up. When it's done right, when it's not, when it's good, and when it clearly has been fumbled. Leave those comments and those discussions below. Be nice, be kind, of course, but I'd love to hear what you have to say. So until next time, thanks for watching this video here on the Dice Tower. My name is Chris Yee, and I'm not playing Hamburg.